Hello and welcome, I'm DarcyBits, and today I'm going to be taking a look at my top picks for Pauper Commanders from March of the Machine. If you don't know Pauper Commander, it is a variant on the Commander format, which lets you run 99 commons in your deck and one uncommon creature as your commander. No legendary required, just an uncommon creature. This is my breakdown of what I think is actually really interesting from the uncommon creatures from March of the Machine. I do plan to do a full set review video from the perspective of Pauper Commander eventually, where I talk about some of the really interesting cards and why they actually don't really work. But for today, let's jump in to our first card. Axgard Artisan is a 2-mana red 2/1 Dwarf Artificer. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on Axgard Artisan, for the first time each turn, create a treasure token. Treasure tokens, as usual, tap to create mana of any color. Tap and sacrifice. You know what I mean. You've seen treasure before, presumably. This card is definitely not the biggest powerhouse possible, but I think it has a lot of interesting potential in that it gives you a build around, which is the main thing I look for in a commander. You want to be having a deck that puts counters on creatures, especially this guy, and then maybe even be able to use those treasures. Now, there are a ton of really powerful, especially in mono red, treasure commanders for Pauper Commander, as well as +1/+1 counters one. So, I don't think it pushes out any other options. But the beautiful thing about Commander is that we don't have to be playing the most powerful thing. This is a cool design for a card that you can build around, and sometimes that's enough, because you want to do something a bit different than the most powerful thing possible. We're playing Pauper. We don't care about being the most broken possible. At least, I don't think so, personally. Kami of Whispered Hopes is a 3-mana green 1/1 spirit. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. You can also tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is Kami of Whispered Hopes' power. This is a 3-mana card, so for a form of ramp, it is a bit slow. It's also worth pointing out that it is doing an effect that we have seen in the command zone in Pauper Commander in the past. If we look at Winding Constrictor, we can see a black-green 2-mana 2/3. This has basically the same ability, except for it doesn't even care about if they are +1/+1 counters. It's any counter being placed on an artifact or a creature right you control. Put that many counters +1 on that turn, which is a great power thing. It's also a bigger body in the first place, so it's a lot harder to be removed. Still, both of them are subject to removal, so it's not that big of a difference, but it's worth pointing out. Now, like I said before, we're not necessarily worrying about the most powerful thing, and there is a niche for Kami of Whispered Hours that this does not have, which is its second ability of being able to tap for mana. Since you're increasing your +1/+1 counters, you're probably going to be able to get it pretty big pretty fast, but also you could always just cast a pump spell to increase its power and then tap it to get a huge burst of power, turning your pump spells into rituals. A lot of potential, really excited for that one. Xerox Strobe-knight is a 3-mana blue 2/2 human knight with flying and vigilance. Tap, created 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. Activate only if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn. This one's really interesting. In March of the Machine, we see a lot of knight synergy. There's a bunch of cards that care about knights. In this deck, I don't think we actually care about the fact that these tokens are knights. Across our commons available, I don't think we care that much about knights as a synergy. You really want your knight synergy in the command zone, and then you can just have a bunch of knights in your actual deck. This is not about that. This is about either Spell Slinger, so that you can get those 2 spells each turn, or it's about just going wide with tokens. Being able to tap something to make a 2/2 every turn is huge. Very excited to see this. It also has vigilance, so you can attack with this, not be tapped out, and then even block with it later. The downside, of course, is you have to make sure you can be able to cast 2 spells on an opponent's turn if you wanted to tap this after declaring a block. And you also might not want to be blocking with this if you're afraid that your 2/2 is going to die. It's not the biggest body, but you should be able to go pretty wide with this. It also doesn't have a restriction of being activated only once per turn. So if you have spells that untap Xerox, this can just go off. Tiller of Flesh is a 4-mana white 2/4 Phyrexian Knight. Whenever you cast a spell that targets one or more permanents, incubate 2. Now, there's a ton of incubate cards at the uncommon level that are really, really interesting. Unfortunately, there's basically no incubate cards at the common level. This means that any of your cards that do have some synergy with incubating probably aren't actually playable as commanders in Pauper Commander, because you just don't have enough actual incubation. Tiller of Flesh, on the other hand, brings their own incubation to the table, so you don't have to worry about not having enough of those. We'll still have to see if creating tokens constantly is good enough. Can you be actually using the incubate tokens? Are just the artifacts alone good enough? I'm not entirely sure yet, but it seems like a really simple activation. You can hit this trigger constantly and multiple times this turn if it's something you are building around. There is also a lot of support in white for your incubate. Specifically, Attentive Skyward is a 3-mana 2/2 at common. They're a flyer that whenever they deal combat damage to a player or a battle, transform one of your incubator tokens. So you can just start flipping them without needing to actually spend the 2 mana every time. It's worth pointing out, since we mentioned battles are not going to be coming up in this analysis. Simply none of them exist at common. Until we get future battles that actually show up at common, there's absolutely no reason to be running a battle-focused commander in Pauper Commander at the moment. Completed Huntmaster is a 3-mana 2/3 black Phyrexian Elf Warrior. For 1 and tap, sacrifice another creature or artifact, incubate 3. Now this has all the same discussion points as the last one. What's interesting about this one is that you're getting an incubate 3. This is a bigger body if you manage to flip it. And since it always costs 2 to flip your incubation tokens, you want that mana to be giving you a 3/3, not a 2/2, if you have the option. This is also really interesting as a form of sack outlet. It does tap down Completed Huntmaster, so you can't just completely go off unless you have some untappers, but it is a very cheap sack outlet that hits both creatures and artifacts and is giving you an extra body along the way. Especially if you're playing a deck that cares about sacrificing artifacts, maybe that's all you want your incubators for. Not entirely sure, but it's interesting to have a different angle for a very similar effect. Once again, in the command zone, not reliant on your combo pieces being in the deck. Stormclaw Rager is a 3-mana black and red 2/2 Ogre Warrior. For 1 mana, sacrifice another creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Stormclaw Rager, and draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery. Something I haven't mentioned in this video yet is that dual color commanders are kind of at a premium in Pauper Commander, at least in my opinion, because there's so many just monocolored cards that are available for your commander. And you can make some really cool monocolored decks, but having that flexibility of an extra color is really, really nice. Here we're seeing another sack outlet in our command zone, and this time doesn't even tap, so you can just go off with this. It does once again cost a single generic mana, but it is still a very cheap sacrifice outlet. The downside of this one is that it does take a sorcery speed action, which means you can't block and then sacrifice your blockers before damage, which really, really limits the potential of Stormclaw Rager, but still a very strong card. It makes a great sack outlet if you need one of those, and it's a very powerful ability on top of it. Being able to get +1 counter on itself, protects itself, and then you're drawing cards, which every deck wants. Botanical Brawler is a 2-mana green and white 0/0 elemental warrior with trample. Botanical Brawler enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on another permanent you control, if it's the first time +1/+1 counters have been put on that permanent, this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Botanical Brawler. This one also cares about +1/+1 counters like we saw with Kami of Whispered Hopes. I got it right this time. But instead, it buffs itself instead of increasing the power of whatever you put them on. It still wants you to sort of go wide and put counters on your other creatures, but you're ramping up your commander, and you've got trample. So there's actually a very good chance that you're going to be able to win through commander damage with Botanical Brawler. It also gives you both green and white to play with, which are very good colors for these +1/+1 counter decks. a lot of support that already exists because it's just +1/+1 encounters. We don't need support exclusively for March of the Machine like we do for Incubate, for example. Notvold Hermit is a 4 mana, 4/4 green troll, but its ID is blue and green because it has the ability for 5 mana and 1 Phyrexian blue mana, transform Notvold Hermit. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, there's a lot of these transforming creatures in March of the Machine, and a lot of them don't seem that great. They cost a lot to get down, and then they cost even more to flip. But the thing that I think is important to remember about them is that when they transform, they're not exiling and returning to the battlefield. They can attack immediately. So if you play this on turn 4 as a 4/4, and then on your next turn, instead of playing a 5-drop, you simply transform this, you now have its body that can attack immediately. Now, as you can see, it transforms into a 5/5, so effectively you're spending 5 mana plus 2 life to give it +1/+1. That's not good enough, clearly. So let's see what it actually gets when it transforms. This transforms into Chrome Host Hulk, which is a 5/5 Phyrexian troll. Whenever Chrome Host Hulk attacks, up to one other target creature has base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. And this is why I think this card actually has a lot of potential. You play it on turn 4 alongside any other random 1-drop, or maybe you're going with a token deck and you're actually going kind of wide. And then the next turn, turn 5, you can immediately flip it and be attacking with 10 power. You're basically adding 9 power to the board across 2 turns on turn 5. I think that has a lot of potential. There's a lot of really powerful, just hit you really hard commanders out there. So I'm not saying it's the most powerful thing possible, but it's in both green and blue, which gives you a lot of color flexibility. And it's just cool. It's a cool troll. I want my commanders to be cool. That's like so important to me. Look at this guy! Marshal Zalfir is a 2 mana white and blue 2/2 human knight. This one is finally our Knight Matters commander. There was a bunch of things I cared about knights, but this is the only one that actually is giving us both blue and white, which is kind of crucial if you want to go into knights. Your options are pretty limited if you don't have 2 colors, and blue and white are probably the best 2 for Pauper Commander. It's just a lord, and there's plenty of lords in the world for other creature types, so probably not the most broken lord in the format, but it is a lord for knights if that's something you want to build around, and it has a pretty solid ability. For white and blue and tap another target creature. Being able to tap things down is just good a lot of the time. It's nothing super special as a build around, it's just a really solid card that facilitates building a deck that you might have otherwise wanted to build that you just didn't have a good commander for. Lastly, we have Kenra Spell Spear. This one's my favorite, and it's another one of these flip cards. So Kenra Spell Spear is a 2 mana 2/2 red Jackal Warrior, but its ID includes blue. It has Trample and Prowess, which if you don't know means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. For 3 and 1 blue Phyrexian, you can transform Kenra Spell Spear, activating only as a sorcery. When transformed, it becomes Gitaxian Spell Stalker, a 3/3, not that much bigger, trample, ward 2, so it protects itself, prowess. There's a lot of support for the prowess keyword in Pauper, or at least a lot of common cards that were printed with it, which is important because every spell you're casting is triggering all of your instances of prowess. So the more prowess you have on the battlefield, the more useful that is for you. I took a look at all of the history of Pauper commanders, what actually would make the best prowess commander, and I think this actually does stand as the best for that archetype. Just having 2 instances of it on one body is really, really nice, but then it also protects itself, and once again, we're seeing it having trample, making it a very powerful Voltron-style commander. You could either be going hard into your non-creature spells to just pump the Gitaxian Spellstalker itself, or you could be going wide so that every one of your non-creature spells triggers all of your prowesses across your entire board. Either way, a lot of really interesting potential for build-arounds, and you can do it however you want, which is kind of the best situation. You want to be having options. You don't want to just be building a deck paint by number style, or at least I don't. Those have been my top picks for Pauper Commanders from March of the Machine. I'm really excited to do a full review in a future video. A lot of really good new commons available that I'm excited to throw into the deck, and a lot of really interesting cards that I just want to dissect and talk about. The potential that they have that is unrealized at this point. I have been Darcy Bits. Have a good night.